"You're nothing but a worthless nobody," Rowan Sterling's slurred voice echoed as he tore Celine Hawthorne's shirt, exposing the stark tattoo across her back in the stunned silence of May's diner. The fluorescent lights caught the name Elijah etched beneath the U.S. Army emblem, freezing the drunken millionaire in his tracks, his face twisting from rage to fear. In Fairhaven, Ohio, this moment sparked a fire no one saw coming. A single act of cruelty unraveled a web of corruption, revealing a woman whose hidden strength would turn a predator into prey. Stay with us until the end to witness how one tattoo shattered an empire of greed and ignited a community's courage. If this grips you, hit that subscribe button, like the video, and drop a comment sharing where and when you're watching from. Your support fuels more stories like this. "You're nothing but a worthless nobody," Rowan Sterling's voice, thick with whiskey and venom, sliced through the quiet hum of May's diner like a jagged blade. Celine Hawthorne, her heart pounding against her rib cage, stood frozen behind the counter, her long black hair cascading over her shoulders, the delicate silver clip glinting under the diner's fluorescent lights. The air felt heavy, oppressive, as if the world held its breath. Rowan, his tailored suit rumpled from a night of excess, swayed on his feet, his bloodshot eyes locked on her with a mix of disdain and dangerous entitlement. The handful of late-night patrons, truckers nursing coffee, a lone retiree picking at a slice of pie, fell silent, their forks suspended, their gazes darting between the drunken millionaire and the young black waitress who dared to defy him. Celine's fingers tightened around the coffee pot, its warmth a fleeting anchor against the storm brewing in her chest. She was 29, but in that moment, she felt the weight of every year, every scar from Iraq, every sleepless night haunted by explosions in the face of Elijah Sterling, the soldier whose name was inked across her back. "Sir, we're not serving alcohol," she said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "You've had enough. Please sit down or leave." Her words were calm, practiced, but inside her pulse roared like the Humvees she once rode through desert checkpoints. She'd faced worse than a rich man's tantrum, warlords, gunfire, the screams of the wounded. But something about Rowan's cruelty felt personal, like a blade aimed at her soul. Rowan's laugh was sharp, cutting, the kind that made the diner's red vinyl booths seem smaller, the checkered curtains more faded. "You don't tell me what to do," he snarled, stepping closer, his breath reeking of bourbon. "You're just a waitress in a nowhere town. Know your place." The words stung, not because they were new, Celine had heard variations of them her whole life, but because they echoed the doubts that gnawed at her in the quiet hours. The doubts that whispered she was broken, unfit for anything beyond pouring coffee in Fairhaven, Ohio, a town that felt both too small and too vast for her fractured spirit. The diner's clock ticked toward 10 p.m., its hands moving with agonizing slowness. Celine's shift was supposed to be uneventful, a quiet night of wiping counters and refilling mugs for the regulars who treated May's diner like a second home. May, the owner, had left early, her kind eyes heavy with worry about unpaid bills and whispered threats from Sterling Ventures. Celine had volunteered to close up, partly to help May, partly to avoid the silence of her cramped apartment, where memories of Iraq waited like landmines. But now, standing under Rowan's glare, she felt exposed, as if the diner's walls had peeled away, leaving her vulnerable in a way she hadn't felt since her last patrol. Rowan's hand shot out, faster than she expected, grabbing the collar of her uniform. The fabric tore with a sickening rip, the sound echoing like a gunshot in the stillness. Gas rippled through the diner as the cool air hit Celine's back, revealing the stark black tattoo of the U.S. Army emblem, wings spread wide with Elijah etched beneath in bold, unyielding letters. Her breath caught, not from the cold or the torn shirt, but from the raw exposure of a truth she'd kept buried. The tattoo was her armor, her burden, a promise she'd failed to keep. She felt the eyes of every patron on her, their silence louder than Rowan's curses, their curiosity a weight she couldn't shake. Rowan staggered back, his face draining of color, his eyes wild with alcohol and arrogance fixed on the tattoo. And for a fleeting moment, Celine saw something beyond his rage, fear, recognition, a crack in his polished facade. Elijah, he muttered, the name slipping from his lips like a confession he hadn't meant to make. The diner seemed to hold its breath, the air thick with unspoken questions. Who was Elijah? Why did his name stop a man like Rowan Sterling in his tracks? Celine's heart raced, her mind flashing to desert sands, to Elijah's laughter, to the explosion that stole him away. She wanted to scream, to demand answers, but her training kicked in. Observe, assess, survive. You don't know what you're doing, Rowan spat, his voice lower now, almost a growl. He stumbled toward the door, knocking over a chair in his haste, his polished shoes squeaking against the linoleum. The bell above the door jangled as he fled into the night, leaving behind a diner frozen in shock. Celine stood rooted, her torn shirt hanging loose, her back exposed to the world. She felt naked, not just physically but emotionally, as if Rowan's act had stripped away the fragile shield she'd built since leaving the army. The tattoo, once a private vow, was now a public mystery, its power undeniable, but its meaning unclear even to her. The trucker at the counter, a grizzled man named Hank, broke the silence. You okay, miss? His voice was gentle, but Celine could only nod, her throat tight with emotions she couldn't name. Anger, shame, defiance, grief. She set the coffee pot down, her hands trembling, and pulled her hair forward to cover the torn fabric, the silver clip catching the light like a beacon of resilience. The retiree, Mrs. Clara, reached out, her weathered hand offering a napkin as if it could mend more than just the moment. That man's trouble, she whispered, always has been. Celine managed a faint smile, but her mind was elsewhere, replaying Rowan's reaction, the way his confidence shattered at the sight of Elijah's name. She moved to the back, grabbing a spare apron to cover her torn uniform, her fingers brushing the tattoo as she adjusted the straps. It felt alive, burning against her skin, a reminder of promises unkept and battles unfinished. Why had Rowan run? What did he know about Elijah that made him flee like a man haunted? Celine's PTSD, usually a shadow lurking in her nightmares, stirred now, whispering that she wasn't ready for whatever war Rowan's actions had ignited. Yet beneath the fear, a spark of her old self, the soldier who'd navigated war zones, flickered to life. She wasn't just a waitress. She was a survivor, and something told her this night was only the beginning. As she locked the diner's door, the neon sign flickering in the cold Ohio night, Celine felt the weight of Fairhaven's secrets pressing against her. Rowan Sterling wasn't just a drunk millionaire throwing a tantrum. He was a predator, and she'd just become his prey, or his reckoning. The tattoo on her back, a silent vow to a fallen friend, had sparked something unstoppable. She didn't know how, but it had turned a moment of humiliation into a mystery that could unravel everything. The morning sun filtered through the cracked windows of May's diner, casting jagged shadows across the red vinyl booths. But it did little to warm the chill that had settled in Celine Hawthorne's bones. Her long black hair, still adorned with the delicate silver clip, hung loosely over her shoulders, brushing the apron she'd tied over last night's torn uniform. The memory of Rowan Sterling's bourbon-soaked voice, "You're nothing but a worthless nobody," echoed in her mind, each word a fresh bruise on her already battered spirit. She stood behind the counter, wiping it with a rag that felt heavier than it should, her dark eyes scanning the diner for threats that weren't there, a habit forged in Iraq's dusty war zones. The air smelled of burnt coffee and grease, but beneath it lingered the sharper scent of fear, hers, and now May's. May, the diner's owner, stood at the far end of the counter, her graying hair pulled into a tight bun, her hands trembling as she unfolded a letter that had arrived with the morning mail. Her face, usually warm with a smile that welcomed Fairhaven's regulars, was etched with lines of dread. Celine watched her, feeling a pang of guilt for last night's confrontation. She'd stood up to Rowan, but at what cost? The diner, a 40-year beacon of community, felt like a fortress under siege, its checkered curtains sagging as if they too carried the weight of Rowan's threats. "Celine, you need to see this," May said, her voice barely above a whisper, as if speaking louder might summon the devil himself. She slid the letter across the counter, its crisp white paper a stark contrast to the diner's worn surfaces. Celine's heart sank as she read the words. Sterling Ventures offers $1.5 million for the immediate purchase of May's Diner. Failure to comply will result in enforcement of safety violations, including faulty electrical systems and gas leaks. Attached were official-looking reports, stamped with the Fairhaven Building Department's seal, detailing critical issues that could shutter the diner for good. Celine's stomach twisted. She'd seen this before. Not in Ohio, but in Iraq, where warlords fabricated crises to break villages into submission. They're lying, Celine said, her voice steady but laced with a quiet fury that surprised even her. She set the letter down, her fingers brushing the counter as if grounding herself against the rising tide of panic. These violations didn't exist last week. She moved to the kitchen, her eyes scanning the electrical panel near the stove. The wires, once neatly bundled, bore fresh cuts, deliberate and precise, like the work of a surgeon with a vendetta. She knelt by the gas line, her fingers tracing the valve, loosened just enough to suggest a leak, but not enough to trigger immediate alarm. Her military training kicked in, the same instincts that had kept her alive through ambushes now screaming that this was no accident. Rowan was waging war, and the diner was his battlefield. May followed, her steps heavy, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. I can't afford repairs, Celine, she said, her voice cracking. $15,000? I'd have to sell my house, my car, everything. She clutched her apron, the same one she'd worn for decades, its faded flowers a testament to her resilience. This place is all I have. It's where I met my husband, where we raised our kids. It's where this town comes to feel whole. Her words hit Celine like shrapnel, each one lodging in the part of her that still ached for purpose after the army spit her out. Celine stood, her hands clenching into fists, the silver clip in her hair catching the light like a beacon of defiance. She wanted to tell May it would be okay, but the lie stuck in her throat. She'd seen what men like Rowan could do. Men who used wealth like a weapon, who crushed dreams to build empires. In Iraq, she'd watched villages burn under similar tactics, families forced to flee because they couldn't fight power backed by corruption. But she wasn't in Iraq anymore, and May wasn't just a victim. She was family, the closest thing Celine had to a home since her discharge. I've seen this before, Celine said, her voice low but firm, as if speaking the truth could anchor them both. In Iraq, warlords would sabotage water supplies, burn crops, then offer protection to fix the problems they created. Rowan's doing the same thing, breaking things so he can force you to sell. She paused, her mind racing back to a dusty outpost, to the lessons learned under fire. They only win if you give up, May, and you're not giving up. May's eyes met hers, searching for something. Hope, maybe, or the strength she'd lost under the weight of fear. But what can we do? He owns half this town, the bank, the inspectors, maybe even the police. Her voice trembled, but there was a flicker of fight in it, a spark Celine recognized from her own moments of defiance. Celine's heart ached for May, for the woman who'd given her a job when no one else would, who'd seen past the PTSD and the scars to the person beneath. Celine walked to the diner's front window, staring out at Fairhaven's quiet streets. The town felt smaller today, its storefronts boarded up, its spirit dimmed by Sterling Ventures' shadow. She thought of the tattoo on her back, Elijah's name burning like a vow she'd failed to keep. Rowan's reaction last night, his fear, his flight, meant something, but she couldn't yet piece it together. All she knew was that he wasn't just after the diner. He was after control, and she was in his way. I learned something in Iraq, Celine said, turning back to May, her voice carrying the weight of hard-won wisdom. Bullies like Rowan thrive on fear, but they crumble when you expose their tricks. We need to find proof, something that shows he's behind this. Her mind was already mapping the battlefield, her intelligence training kicking in. She'd spent months analyzing enemy tactics, finding weak points in seemingly invincible systems. Rowan wasn't invincible. He was just a man with too much money and too little soul. May nodded, her hands steadying as she wiped her eyes. You're more than a waitress, Celine, she said softly. You've got a fire in you, same as my husband had when he fought to keep this place open during the hard years. The words wrapped around Celine like a lifeline, pulling her back from the edge of self-doubt. She wasn't just a broken veteran, she was a soldier, and soldiers didn't surrender. As the lunch crowd began to trickle in, Celine tied her apron tighter, her fingers brushing the spot where her shirt had torn, where Elijah's name lay hidden. The diner hummed with life again, but beneath the clink of plates and the murmur of voices, a storm was brewing. Rowan's letter wasn't a negotiation, it was a declaration of war. And Celine, with her scars and her secrets, was ready to fight back, not just for May, but for the part of herself she thought was lost forever. Celine Hawthorne sat alone in her cramped Fairhaven apartment, the dim glow of a single bulb casting long shadows across the peeling wallpaper. Her long black hair, freed from its silver clip, spilled over her shoulders, framing her face like a curtain she wished could hide her from the world. The mirror above the chipped sink reflected a woman she barely recognized. 29 years old, eyes hollowed by sleepless nights, the weight of Iraq etched into every line. Her fingers traced the edge of the torn diner uniform folded on the counter, the rip exposing her vulnerability as much as it had revealed the tattoo on her back. The U.S. Army emblem, wings spread defiantly, with Elijah inked beneath in stark, unyielding letters. That name, a wound that never healed, burned hotter now, stirred by Rowan Sterling's inexplicable fear 2 nights ago. She closed her eyes and the desert roared back, dust choking her lungs, the deafening blast of an IED, Elijah's laughter cut short by screams. He'd been her brother in arms, a kid from privilege who chose service over comfort, his blue eyes bright with a belief in justice that Celine envied. They'd shared stories under starlit Iraqi skies, his dreams of using his family's wealth to help veterans, her fears of never belonging anywhere. When the explosion stole him, she'd promised to carry his story home, to tell his family he died bravely. The tattoo was her vow, etched in pain during a leave in Baghdad. But the Army's discharge, labeled psychological instability after her breakdown, had buried that promise under shame. She'd failed Elijah, failed herself, and now Rowan, his brother, was tearing open those wounds with his cruelty. Her phone buzzed, shattering the silence. An unknown number flashed on the screen, the message cold and precise. Leave Fairhaven or the truth about Elijah comes out. Celine's heart lurched, her breath catching as if the air had turned to sand. She stared at the words, each one a dagger twisting in her gut. What truth? That she'd held Elijah as he bled out, his hand gripping hers, his final words about love and pride lost in the chaos? Or something darker, something Rowan knew that she didn't? Her hands trembled, not from fear, but from a rage that simmered beneath her grief. Rowan wasn't just threatening May's diner, he was weaponizing her past, her pain, to drive her away. She stood, pacing the tiny apartment, her bare feet cold against the cracked linoleum. The walls seemed to close in, each creak of the building a reminder of her precarious life. Rent overdue, savings drained, nightmares waiting to pounce. She'd come to Fairhaven to escape, to rebuild, but Rowan's presence made it feel like she'd never left the battlefield. His reaction to her tattoo, his pale face, his muttered Elijah, wasn't just shock. It was guilt or fear, or both. She could still see his bloodshot eyes, wide with something deeper than drunken rage, as he stumbled out of the diner. What did he know about his brother's death that made him run? The question gnawed at her, as relentless as the PTSD that woke her screaming most nights. Celine sank onto the sagging couch, her fingers brushing the tattoo through her thin t-shirt. It felt alive, a pulse of memory that tied her to Elijah, to the soldier she'd been before the Army deemed her broken. She'd joined to prove she was more than a small-town girl with no future, but the discharge had branded her a failure. Unstable, they'd called her, after she'd lashed out at a superior who'd ordered her to abandon the search for Elijah's body. She'd spent hours under fire, dragging him to safety, only to watch him slip away. The Army hadn't cared about her sacrifice, only her insubordination. The shame had followed her home, a shadow heavier than any bomb. Her phone buzzed again. Another message. You're a liability, Hawthorne. Mentally unfit, stay out of my way. The words hit like shrapnel, each one slicing through the fragile armor she'd built. Rowan had dug into her military record, found the discharge papers, the psych evaluations, the moments she'd fought to bury. Her chest tightened, the familiar prelude to a panic attack, racing heart, shallow breaths, the room spinning like a Humvee rolling into a ditch. She gripped the couch, forcing herself to breathe, to focus on the silver clip on the table, its gleam a reminder of the woman who'd survived worse than this. She wasn't unstable. She was a soldier who'd carried her squad through hell, who'd memorized enemy patterns, who'd learned to outsmart warlords with more power than Rowan could dream of. Her fingers steadied as she picked up the phone, staring at the messages. They weren't just threats, they were a playbook, the same tactics she'd seen in Iraq. Isolate, intimidate, destroy. Rowan thought he could break her, just as he was trying to break May, to break Fairhaven. But he didn't know her. He didn't know the woman who'd crawled through sand to save a friend, who'd carried Elijah's memory like a sacred burden. Celine stood, her reflection in the mirror now sharper, more resolute. She pulled her hair back, securing it with the silver clip, its weight grounding her. Rowan's threats were a sign of weakness, not strength. He was scared. Of her, of Elijah's name, of what she might uncover. She thought of May, her trembling hands clutching that letter, her voice breaking as she spoke of losing the diner. May had given Celine a chance when no one else would, had seen past the scars to the person beneath. Celine owed her more than surrender. She opened her laptop, her fingers moving with purpose as she began searching for Sterling Ventures. Public records, property filings, anything that could expose Rowan's tactics. Her military training kicked in. Map the enemy, find the weak points, strike where they least expect. The messages on her phone were a warning, but also a clue. Rowan was watching, digging, which meant he had something to hide. The tattoo on her back, Elijah's name, was more than a memory. It was a weapon, one she didn't yet understand, but would wield when the time came. As the night deepened, Fairhaven's quiet streets outside her window felt like a battlefield waiting to erupt. Celine's heart still raced, her PTSD a constant shadow, but beneath it burned a fire she hadn't felt since Iraq. She wasn't just fighting for May's diner, or even for herself. She was fighting for Elijah, for the promise she'd made, for the woman she could still become. Rowan Sterling thought he could bury her with threats and shame. He was about to learn how wrong he was. The noonday sun poured through the windows of May's diner, painting the red vinyl booths in harsh light, but the warmth did nothing to ease the knot of dread in Celine Hawthorne's chest. Her long black hair, secured with its silver clip, gleamed as she moved between tables, refilling coffee for Fairhaven's lunch crowd. The diner buzzed with the clatter of plates and murmured conversations, but Celine's senses were razor-sharp, honed by years in Iraq's war zones. Every clink of a spoon, every creak of the door, felt like a warning. 2 nights ago, Rowan Sterling had torn her uniform, exposing the tattoo on her back. Elijah's name, a wound that still bled, and fled in fear. Now she knew he'd return, his pride too bruised to let her defiance go unanswered. Celine's hands trembled as she poured coffee for Mr. Thompson, a retired teacher whose kind eyes lingered on her with concern. She forced a smile, but inside her heart pounded like a war drum, echoing the nightmares that had kept her awake since Rowan's threats. Leave Fairhaven or the truth about Elijah comes out. The words haunted her, each one a reminder of her failure to honor Elijah's memory, of the army's dismissal that branded her broken. Yet beneath the fear, a spark of defiance flickered, the same fire that had carried her through ambushes, that refused to let a man like Rowan Sterling win. The bell above the door jangled, and the diner fell silent as Rowan strode in, his expensive suit wrinkled, his face flushed with the reckless edge of a man who'd been drinking since dawn. The air thickened. The lunch crowd, truckers, shopkeepers, a trio of elderly women from the church, freezing mid-bite, their eyes darting to Celine. Rowan's gaze locked onto her, his lips curling into a sneer. "You're still here, huh?" he slurred, his voice loud enough to carry across the diner. Thought you'd run by now, you useless nobody. The words hit like shrapnel. But Celine stood tall, her dark eyes meeting his without flinching. She'd faced worse than a drunk millionaire's insults. Taliban snipers, roadside bombs. But the personal venom in his voice cut deeper, stirring the shame she fought to bury. "Welcome to Maze," she said, her voice steady, though her pulse roared. "What can I get you?" She set a menu before him, her movements deliberate, military precise, as if she could control the chaos he brought. Rowan ignored the menu, leaning across the counter, his breath sour with whiskey. "Coffee, black," he snapped. "And make it quick, or do you only know how to fail at everything?" The diner's silence grew heavier, the weight of his cruelty pressing on everyone. Celine felt their eyes, curious, pitying, afraid, and her cheeks burned with a mix of humiliation and rage. She wanted to scream, to throw the coffee pot at him, but she learned in Iraq to keep her emotions locked down, to wait for the right moment to strike. She returned with the coffee, setting it down carefully, but Rowan's hand shot out, knocking the cup over. Dark liquid spilled across the counter, pooling like blood on the white tiles. "Oops," he said, his smile venomous. "Clean it up, waitress. That's what you're good for." The words were a deliberate echo of his first attack, a reminder of her exposed tattoo, her vulnerability. Celine's hands clenched, her nails biting into her palms. She saw Elijah's face in her mind, his laughter, his sacrifice, and the promise she'd made to carry his memory. She wouldn't let this man break her. Not here, not now. "I said, clean it up," Rowan shouted, his voice cracking the diner's fragile calm. He reached for her again, his fingers snagging the edge of her apron, tugging hard enough to tear the fabric. The crowd gasped, and Celine's heart lurched as she stumbled back, the memory of her torn shirt 2 nights ago flooding her senses. But before Rowan could pull harder, Mr. Thompson stood, his chair scraping loudly. "That's enough, Sterling," he said, his voice trembling but firm, his teacher's authority cutting through the tension. Across the room, Joe, the mechanic, rose too, his grease-stained hands balled into fists. "Leave her alone," he growled, stepping forward. The church ladies clutched their purses, their whispers of support a quiet rebellion against Rowan's tyranny. Celine's chest swelled with a mix of gratitude and fear. These people, strangers who'd become her community, were risking themselves for her, just as she'd once risked everything for Elijah. But the weight of their courage pressed on her, a reminder that her fight wasn't hers alone. Rowan's face reddened, his arrogance faltering under the unexpected resistance. "You think you can protect her?" he sneered, but his voice wavered. He released her apron, stepping back, his eyes darting to the crowd now watching him like a cornered animal. Without another word, he stormed out, the bell jangling as he fled into the daylight. The diner exhaled, conversations resuming in hushed tones, but Celine's knees felt weak. She leaned against the counter, her breath shallow, the spilled coffee still dripping onto the floor. Mr. Thompson touched her arm gently. "You're stronger than he thinks," he said, his eyes kind but heavy with worry. Celine nodded, unable to speak, her throat tight with emotions she couldn't name. Pride, shame, and a growing resolve. She'd stood her ground, but Rowan's retreat wasn't a victory. It was a warning of worse to come. As she mopped up the coffee, her eyes caught a glint beneath the counter. A tiny device no bigger than a coin, its red light blinking like a predator's eye. Her military training snapped into focus, surveillance equipment, professional grade, hidden where no one would notice. Her heart raced, not with fear, but with clarity. Rowan was watching, listening, plotting. She crouched, pretending to clean, and used a napkin to cover the device, her fingers steady despite the storm in her chest. She'd disabled similar tech in Iraq, outsmarting enemies who thought they held all the cards. Rowan was no different, just another bully hiding behind power. Celine stood, her silver clip catching the light, a silent vow to herself. She wasn't just a waitress, not just a veteran with scars. She was a soldier, and soldiers didn't run. Rowan thought he could break her with threats and humiliation, but he'd miscalculated. The tattoo on her back, Elijah's name, wasn't just a memory. It was a call to fight. And she was ready. The air in Fairhaven's community church was thick with the scent of old hymnals and polished wood. But to Celine Hawthorne, it felt like a war room. Her long black hair, secured with its silver clip, gleamed under the flickering fluorescent lights as she stood at the front of the dimly lit basement, her dark eyes scanning the faces before her. A dozen people sat on folding chairs, their expressions a mix of fear, anger, and fragile hope. Shopkeepers, bakers, mechanics, all victims of Rowan Sterling's relentless campaign to claim their town. Celine's heart pounded, not from the familiar grip of PTSD, but from the weight of their trust. She wasn't just a waitress anymore, nor just a discharged soldier haunted by Iraq. She was their strategist, their spark, and the responsibility felt both crushing and electrifying. May stood beside her, her weathered hands clasped tightly, her eyes carrying the exhaustion of a woman who'd fought too long alone. The diner's owner had suggested this meeting, her voice trembling with defiance after Rowan's latest assault. Another letter threatening closure. Another fabricated violation pinned to May's diner. Celine felt a surge of loyalty for May, who'd given her a job, a purpose, when Fairhaven was just a stopgap to outrun her past. But now as she faced the gathered crowd, she saw Elijah's face in her mind, his name tattooed on her back, a vow to protect the innocent. This wasn't just about saving the diner. It was about saving a community, and maybe, just maybe, saving herself. "We're here because Rowan Sterling thinks he's won," Celine began, her voice steady, though her insides churned with the ghosts of war zones. "He's been breaking us one by one, vandalism, fake inspections, threats, because he thinks we're too scared to fight back together." She paused, letting her words sink in, watching the faces of her neighbors. There was Clara, the baker whose shop windows were smashed last month. Joe, the mechanic whose garage faced sudden environmental violations. And Maria, the bookstore owner whose lease was mysteriously revoked. Each bore the same haunted look Celine saw in her own reflection. The look of people who'd been taught to feel powerless. Her fingers brushed the silver clip in her hair, grounding her as she continued. "In Iraq, I saw men like Rowan, warlords who used fear to control entire villages. They thrived because people felt alone. But when those villages united, shared their stories, fought as one, the warlords fell." Her voice grew firmer, the soldier in her rising to the surface. "Rowan's no different. He's counting on our silence. Tonight we break it." Clara, her hands trembling, spoke first. "He sent men to my bakery at night, broke my ovens, said it was faulty wiring. I can't afford repairs, and he knows it." Her voice cracked, shame and anger warring in her eyes. Celine's heart ached. She knew that shame, the kind that made you question your own worth. Joe nodded, his grease-stained fingers clenching. "Same with my garage. Inspectors showed up, claimed I was dumping oil illegally. I've been clean for 20 years. Maria's eyes glistened. "He canceled my lease, said the building was unsafe. Now I'm selling books out of my garage." The room filled with murmurs, each story a thread in Rowan's web of corruption. Celine pulled out her laptop, her movements precise, military-trained. "Rowan's not just bullying us, he's breaking laws. Tax evasion, forged contracts, payoffs to local officials." She opened files she'd spent sleepless nights compiling, public records of Sterling Ventures' shell companies, discrepancies in property assessments, emails hinting at bribes. "He's using the same playbook I saw in Iraq. Create crises, then offer solutions that only benefit him. But every playbook has weaknesses." Her voice carried a quiet fire, the kind that had kept her alive through ambushes. She felt Elijah's memory urging her forward, his belief in justice fueling her resolve. May stepped forward, her voice soft but unwavering. "Celine's right. This diner's been my life for 40 years. Rowan wants to tear it down for his fancy resort, but I won't let him erase what we've built." Her eyes met Celine's, a silent thank you passing between them. Celine felt a warmth she hadn't known since her squad days, a sense of belonging she'd thought was lost forever. "We need to hit him where it hurts," Celine said. "Expose his crimes, not to his cronies, but to people he can't buy. Federal authorities, journalists, anyone who'll listen." Joe leaned forward, his jaw tight. "But he's watching us. I saw a guy in a black sedan outside my shop taking pictures. Celine's pulse quickened. She'd found the surveillance device in the diner, its red light blinking like a predator's eye. That's our advantage, she said, her mind racing with tactics honed in war. He thinks he's in control, but we can feed him lies. She outlined her plan. Stage conversations in the diner to mislead Rowan's spies, hinting at surrender while they gathered evidence. Let him think we're breaking. He'll get sloppy, and that's when we strike. Clara's eyes widened, hope flickering where despair had been. You really think we can win? Celine hesitated, her PTSD whispering doubts, images of Elijah's lifeless face, her own discharge papers, but she pushed them aside. I know we can, she said, her voice fierce. I've seen bullies like Rowan fall when people stop being afraid. The room shifted, fear giving way to determination, a fragile unity forming among strangers who'd suffered in silence. As the meeting ended, Celine lingered, her fingers brushing the spot where her tattoo lay hidden. Elijah's name felt heavier now, not just a burden, but a call to action. She thought of Rowan's drunken rage, his fear when he saw the tattoo, and the messages threatening to expose the truth about Elijah. Whatever he knew, it was his weakness, and she'd find it. She wasn't just fighting for May, for Clara, for Joe. She was fighting for the soldier she'd been, the one who'd believed in protecting the innocent, even when it cost everything. Outside, Fairhaven's streets were quiet, but the church basement hummed with a new energy. Celine felt the weight of her past, her failures, her scars, but also a spark of purpose. Rowan thought he could crush them with fear, but he'd underestimated the power of a community united, and a woman who'd learned to turn fear into a weapon. The war was just beginning, and Celine was ready to fight. The air in May's diner was electric, charged with the weight of an impending storm as the lunch crowd dwindled to a tense handful of regulars. Celine Hawthorne stood behind the counter, her long black hair secured with its silver clip, a beacon of defiance amid the diner's worn checkered curtains and scuffed linoleum. Her dark eyes, sharp with the vigilance of a soldier, scanned the room, her heart pounding, not from fear, but from the fire of purpose. Days of planning, sleepless nights poring over Sterling Ventures' dirty secrets, and secret meetings with Fairhaven's beleaguered shopkeepers had led to this moment. She'd sent evidence of Rowan Sterling's crimes, tax evasion, forged inspections, illegal surveillance, to FBI agent Marcus Tate, and now the trap was set. But the weight of Elijah's name, inked across her back, pressed heavier than ever, a reminder of the stakes she carried. May stood beside her, her weathered hands gripping a dish towel, her eyes flickering with a mix of hope and dread. The diner, her life's work, was more than a building. It was a sanctuary, and Celine felt its pulse like her own. The memory of Rowan's drunken assault, his hands tearing her shirt, his venomous words still stung, but it had forged her resolve. She'd faced warlords in Iraq, men who thrived on fear, and Rowan was no different. His latest threat, a text warning that everyone you care about will suffer, had only sharpened her focus. She'd fed him lies through his own surveillance device, hinting at surrender, and now she waited, ready to turn his arrogance into his undoing. The bell above the door jangled, and Rowan Sterling stormed in, his suit disheveled, his face flushed with the reckless fury of a man who'd been drinking to drown his doubts. The diner fell silent, the air thick with the collective breath of patrons. Clara the baker, Joe the mechanic, Mr. Thompson the teacher, all watching, their fear tempered by the fragile courage Celine had ignited. Rowan's eyes locked onto her, his sneer a blade aimed at her heart. You think you're clever, don't you? He slurred, his voice loud enough to rattle the coffee cups. Hiding behind your little meetings, whispering about fighting back? You're nothing, a broken soldier playing hero. Celine's chest tightened, the familiar claws of PTSD scratching at her resolve. But she stood tall, her voice steady. I'm not hiding, Rowan. I'm right here. Her words were a challenge, a soldier's defiance honed in war zones. She felt Elijah's memory in the tattoo on her back, a vow that anchored her against the storm of Rowan's cruelty. His gaze flickered, and she saw it again, the fear that had flashed across his face when he first saw Elijah's name. It wasn't just guilt. It was a secret he couldn't face. Rowan laughed, a jagged sound that cut through the diner's tension. You're a liability, Hawthorne, a washed-up veteran with a head full of nightmares. He leaned closer, his breath sour with whiskey. I know about Elijah, my brother. You let him die, didn't you? That's why you're so desperate to play savior now. The words hit like a grenade, exploding memories of desert heat. Elijah's blood on her hands, his fading voice begging her to tell his family he wasn't afraid. Celine's knees buckled, but she gripped the counter, her silver clip glinting like a talisman. She wouldn't break. Not now. Not when May and Fairhaven needed her. You don't get to say his name, she said, her voice low, trembling with rage and grief. Elijah was a hero. He died fighting for something bigger than himself. You're just a coward hiding behind money. The diner gasped, the words a spark in a powder keg. Rowan's face twisted, his composure cracking. You don't know me, he roared, lunging forward, his hands snagging her apron as if to tear it again, to expose her tattoo, her pain. But this time, Celine stepped back, her military training guiding her movements, calm and precise. Elijah would be ashamed of you, she said, her voice cutting through the diner like a blade. He wanted to use your family's wealth to help people, not destroy them. That tattoo on my back? It's his name, his honor, everything you've betrayed. Rowan froze, his hand falling, his eyes wide with a terror that wasn't drunken rage but something deeper. A confrontation with the brother he'd failed. The diner's silence was deafening, every patron leaning forward, their fear giving way to awe. May's hand found Celine's, squeezing tightly, her eyes shining with pride and defiance. Rowan staggered back, his voice a broken whisper. You don't understand. Elijah, he couldn't finish, his face crumpling as if the weight of his brother's memory had finally broken through. Celine saw it then, the guilt, the pain, the truth he'd buried under layers of greed. He'd known about Elijah's death, had perhaps blamed himself for not stopping him from enlisting, and her tattoo was a mirror he couldn't face. You can't run from this, she said, her voice softer now but unyielding. Your crimes, vandalism, bribes, surveillance, they're all on record. The FBI has everything. As if on cue, the bell jangled again, and Agent Marcus Tate entered, his badge gleaming under the diner's lights. Rowan Sterling, he said, his voice calm but firm. We need to talk. Rowan's eyes darted to the door, but the crowd, Clara, Joe, Mr. Thompson, stood, their presence a wall he couldn't breach. Celine felt a rush of triumph, tempered by the ache of Elijah's memory. She'd fought for him, for May, for Fairhaven, and in this moment, she'd won. Rowan's empire of fear was crumbling, and the tattoo on her back, once a symbol of failure, had become the truth that brought him down. The spring breeze swept through Fairhaven, carrying the scent of blooming lilacs and fresh paint as May's Diner gleamed under a newly hung sign, its red and white checkered curtains crisp against polished windows. Celine Hawthorne stood behind the counter, her long black hair secured with its familiar silver clip, a quiet symbol of resilience. The diner buzzed with life, regulars laughing over coffee, new faces drawn by the town's revival. But Celine's heart still carried the weight of the battle won. Her dark eyes, once shadowed by Iraq's ghosts, now shone with purpose, though the tattoo on her back, bearing Elijah's name, pulsed with a bittersweet ache. Months ago, Rowan Sterling's cruelty had torn her world apart, exposing her scars. Now, as Fairhaven rebuilt, she felt the pieces of herself knitting back together, stronger than before. May moved through the diner, her smile radiant, her graying hair catching the sunlight as she refilled mugs with the ease of someone who'd found peace. The diner, once a target of Rowan's greed, was now a beacon, its walls adorned with photos of the community's triumph. Clara's bakery reopened, Joe's garage thriving, Maria's bookstore bustling with readers. Celine watched May, her chest swelling with gratitude for the woman who'd become her anchor. The fight against Rowan had tested them both, but it had also forged a bond deeper than family, rooted in shared defiance and love for this town. The news of Rowan's fate had spread like wildfire. 12 years in federal prison for civil rights violations, racketeering, and fraud. His empire, Sterling Ventures, had crumbled under FBI scrutiny, its shell companies exposed, its bribes documented, its fraudulent contracts voided. Celine felt a quiet satisfaction as she recalled Agent Marcus Tate's words. Your evidence was airtight. Every file she'd compiled, every recording of Rowan's threats, had been a weapon, turning his arrogance into his downfall. But the victory wasn't just legal, it was personal. The community, once fractured by fear, had united, and Celine, once a broken veteran, had found her purpose in their fight. The bell above the door jangled, and Celine's breath caught as a woman entered, her silver hair elegant, her eyes carrying a grief that mirrored Celine's own. Eleanor Sterling, Rowan and Elijah's mother, moved with a quiet dignity, her presence drawing whispers from the diners. Celine's hand instinctively touched her back, where Elijah's name was inked, a vow she'd carried through shame and war. She'd expected anger from Eleanor, perhaps blame for her son's death, but the woman's gaze held only warmth, tempered by sorrow. Celine Hawthorne, she asked softly, her voice trembling with emotion. Celine nodded, her throat tight, the weight of Elijah's memory pressing against her ribs. I'm Eleanor, the woman said, stepping closer. I owe you more than words can express. Celine's heart stuttered, confusion mingling with the familiar pang of guilt. I didn't save him, she whispered, her voice barely audible. Elijah, I tried, but... Eleanor's hand reached out, gentle but firm, stopping her. You carried his memory when I couldn't. You fought for his values when my other son betrayed them. Her eyes glistened, and Celine felt her own tears rising, the shame of her discharge, labeled unstable, dissolving under Eleanor's compassion. Eleanor pulled an envelope from her purse, its weight heavy with promise. This is for the Elijah Sterling Foundation, she said. $50 million, redirected from Rowan's inheritance to support communities like Fairhaven, to help veterans like you. Celine's breath caught, her mind flashing to Elijah's dreams of using his family's wealth for good. I want you to lead it, Eleanor continued. Here, in this diner, where courage was born. May gasped, her hand finding Celine's, and the diner's hum softened, patrons leaning in, sensing the moment's gravity. Celine's eyes stung, the weight of Elijah's name on her back now a beacon rather than a burden. She'd joined the army to escape powerlessness, only to be broken by its judgment. Yet here, in Fairhaven, she'd found redemption, not in glory, but in protecting those who couldn't protect themselves. This diner is home, she said, her voice steady despite the tears. It's where we'll fight for others, for Elijah. Eleanor nodded, her smile a mix of pride and pain, and Celine felt the ghost of her friend at peace, his legacy alive in her purpose. The diner erupted in applause, Clara and Joe standing, their faces alight with hope. Weekly meetings had become a tradition, the community gathering to share resources, plan protections, ensure no predator like Rowan could rise again. Celine looked around, her heart full. Clara's bakery now offered free pastries to veterans, Joe mentored young mechanics, Maria's bookstore hosted reading groups for kids. Fairhaven wasn't just surviving, it was thriving, its scars a testament to its strength. As the sun set, casting a golden glow over the diner, Celine wiped down the counter, her silver clip catching the light. She thought of Rowan's first assault, his hands tearing her shirt, exposing her tattoo, and how it had sparked this revolution. The shame he'd tried to weaponize had become her power. Elijah's name, a rallying cry for a town reborn. May joined her, their hands brushing as they worked, a silent promise to keep fighting. Fairhaven had faced its darkest hour and emerged whole, not because of one woman's courage, but because of a community that refused to stay broken. Celine stepped outside, the spring air cool against her skin. The tattoo on her back felt lighter now, a reminder that even the deepest wounds could heal when shared. Fairhaven's streets glowed with new life, shops reopened, laughter spilling from doorways. And Celine knew this was only the beginning. The Elijah Sterling Foundation would carry their fight beyond this town, to others facing their own Rowans. She wasn't just a soldier anymore, nor a waitress hiding from her past. She was a guardian, and this diner, this community, was her home. Thank you for joining us on this powerful journey of courage and redemption. Celine Hawthorne's story, from a soldier haunted by her past to a beacon of hope for Fairhaven, shows us that even the deepest scars can fuel extraordinary strength when we stand together. Her tattoo, a symbol of loss, became a rallying cry for justice, proving that communities united can topple even the mightiest tyrants. What did this tale spark in you? Share your thoughts in the comments. How did Celine and Fairhaven's fight inspire you? And where are you watching from? Your voice keeps this story alive. Thank you for being here, for believing in the power of ordinary people to do extraordinary things. Stay tuned for more stories that will lift your spirit and ignite your heart. See you next time.